What's up everybody, Rob here, and welcome back to the Newb DM. Today we're going to be going over the Gorgon and the Pegasus. So I'm really excited about this video because the Gorgons and the Pegasus are two of my favorite creatures, both from mythology and in D&D. So for those of you that don't know, the Gorgons were three sisters who were turned into horribly ugly women with snakes for hair that had such an evil and ugly appearance that just gazing at them could turn you to stone. You may be familiar with the story of Medusa, who was one of the Gorgon sisters. The Pegasus, on the other hand, was a flying horse that had wings that it was involved in a couple of heroic stories throughout the Greek mythology, as well as some involvement with Zeus. Now, we'll get to their connections later on, but for now, let's start out by talking about the Gorgons. Now, initially, they weren't the evil monsters that they eventually become. Initially, they were three beautiful sisters. They were actually the three daughters of two gods, one named Keto, the other named Perseus. What I found very funny about Perseus and Keto is that they actually had quite a few children, and it seems that they were on opposite ends of the spectrum. They were either very, very beautiful, or they were just horribly ugly monsters. Now that's besides the point. For now, we're just focusing on, as I said, the Gorgons. Now the Gorgons were three sisters. Their names were Stheno, Uriel, and the most well-known, Medusa. Now, the story of Medusa is very popular, and it's one of those that it seems most people know, at least the basic details of it. Medusa was a very ugly woman, she had snakes for hair, making eye contact with her would turn you to stone, and for the most part, most people know that the fellow who killed her, instead of looking directly at her, looked in a reflection and used that reflection to find her and kill her. As for the two sisters, Stheno and Uriel, you don't really see much more from them outside of the story of Medusa. But that being said, let's go on ahead and jump to the beginning of the Medusa story and discuss what happened. Now, as I said, these three sisters initially weren't ugly. They were very beautiful, and one of the things they were really known for was their beautiful flowing hair. Unfortunately for Medusa, this caught the attention of Poseidon, and you will find that in Greek mythology, this is a common trend. A male god finds a female human very attractive, one thing leads to another, and nobody's happy. Anyway, getting back to our story, Medusa ended up meeting up with Poseidon in a temple of Athena. Now, at this point, it's argued if it was consensual or not, but long story short, Poseidon and Medusa hung out a little bit. So, as you can imagine, Athena wasn't too happy about Poseidon and Medusa hooking up in her temple, and since she couldn't punish Poseidon, she did the next best thing, and punished Medusa. That's another common trend you'll find in a lot of Greek mythology. The gods can't punish other gods, so they just take it out on the humans. Why not? What are they gonna do? Anyway, Athena decided to punish Medusa by taking everything about her that made her desirable and changing it to be more or less the opposite of what she currently is. So her beautiful hair, she turned into venomous snakes. Her great complexion and her beautiful face, she made her so ugly that anyone who looked upon her face would turn to stone. So I'm sure you're asking yourself, if Medusa is the one who caused all the problems, why were her sisters punished? Well, they tried to stand up for Medusa, so they got turned into Gorgons as well. Honestly, I wish I had a better explanation, but that's it. They stood up for her, so they got punished too. Now, Athena was wise. In fact, she was the goddess of wisdom. And she knew that by creating these monsters that were so ugly, merely looking at them would turn you to stone, could potentially cause problems for anyone who accidentally stumbled upon them. So what she did was she cast the three sisters to an island on the edge of the known world called Sarpedon. Now, by sending the monsters to this island, it meant that nobody would accidentally stumble upon them. In fact, the only people who would stumble upon them were going to be people who were actively seeking the Gorgons. Now, on this island, the three sisters found a cave, and they began to live here, and as time passed, a collection of statues began to more or less amass outside of this cave as adventurers came trying to prove themselves against the Gorgons and were turned to stone. So this is the point where our hero, Perseus, comes into play. So there's a couple of things we need to know about Perseus. First is that he was a very brave hero. Second is that he was somewhat poor. And third is that his mother, Danae, was too fine. Seriously, all the problems that come about are pretty much because his mother was really attractive and everybody wanted to marry her. Now, since our story doesn't really focus on Perseus, I'm not going to focus on him for too long, but I will go over the basics. What you really need to know is that there was a king named Polydectes. Now, Polydectes wanted to marry Danae, but Perseus didn't really approve of their marriage. So anytime Polydectes tried to hang out with Perseus' mother, Perseus would kind of interrupt it and never really give him any alone time. Well, Polydectes wanted to get rid of Perseus. So what he did was he held a kind of a banquet. And it was expected that everybody should bring a gift for Polydectes. Well, Perseus was poor and couldn't really bring a gift. So he offered to go on a quest for the king. Polydectes, knowing this was his chance to get rid of Perseus, told him that he wanted him to go out and slay the Gorgon Medusa. Alright boys and girls, it's time for a fun fact. Medusa was the only one of the three Gorgon sisters that was mortal. The other two, Steno and Uriel, were immortal. So when Perseus was given this quest, he got help from none other than Athena. Now, it's debated on what the items actually were and who gave him the items, but for the most part, the items that he received were a sack to put Medusa's head in, a sharp weapon to cut off her head, a shield with a reflective surface, some winged shoes, and a helm of invisibility. Now with these items, Perseus ended up tracking down the island of Sarpedon, and he found the cave that the Gorgons lived in. Wasn't too hard to spot, with there being a ton of statues in the front of it. Now, using the shield with the reflective surface, he was able to gaze into it to see the reflection of everything behind him, and he ended up finding Medusa asleep. Now, with the sharp item, it's debated whether it was a sword or a scythe. He snuck up to Medusa and chopped off her head and put it inside of the bag. Now, this is the point where the winged shoes and the helm of invisibility come into play, because Medusa's sisters were pissed off and they wanted to kill Perseus. Luckily, he turned invisible and flew away with the shoes. Now, it's debated on what Perseus did after this point, but the main things he accomplished was he flew back to his mother, he used Medusa's head and turned Polydectes into stone, and then he gave the head to Athena. Now, Athena ended up putting this head on her shield. So now that we know the story of the Gorgons, let's start looking at the D&D lore. Now, I'm sad to say, in the 5th edition Monster Manual, while the stat block matches up pretty well, the lore itself is completely different. So as we just saw, the Gorgons were created by Athena, who was punishing Medusa and her sisters. In D&D, on the other hand, typically Medusas are created by people who are looking for eternal youth and beauty, who ended up making a bargain with either a demon or a devil or some kind of evil wizard, and while they had this beauty and youth for some time, eventually this became more of a curse, which turned them from a young, beautiful person to an ugly being. Now I'm just going to throw this into the middle here and point out that in Greek mythology they're called Gorgons, in D&D they're called Medusas. Now, while D&D does have its own lore and are more than able to call it whatever they want, we do have to point out that the names are different. I'm suspecting they probably did this because more people are familiar with the name Medusa than they are with the name Gorgon. Anyway, getting back on topic, while the D&D lore and the Greek mythology do not match up at all for origin stories, at least the stat block for the D&D Medusa does match up pretty well, at least for what I would expect a Gorgon to fight with. Both of them are capable of using their ugly visage to turn their enemies to stone. They both also have the snake hair, which in D&D you can actually use as a type of attack. That all being said though, while the stat blocks are very similar, I just can't quite say that the creatures themselves are very similar at all because their origin stories are so completely different. There's nothing wrong with these being different. As I've said previously, the D&D lore was created to fit into its universe. The monster itself is just derived from an existing mythological creature. It doesn't mean that it has to have the same story. But anyway, moving along, I'm sure at this point you're saying to yourself, but Rob, what does the Pegasus have to do with all of this? I'm sure you're also asking, why do I talk to myself so much? Well, while I can't answer the second question, I can at least explain the Pegasus. You see, when Poseidon and Medusa did the dirty, it turns out that Medusa was actually impregnated. Now, as a monster with her ugly visage, she wasn't able to have the children, but when Perseus chopped off Medusa's head, 2 children leaked from the wound. The first one was a giant that wielded a large golden sword, and we're not going to talk about him because giants are going to be a whole new video. Now, while the relationship between a god and a human sprouted a winged horse, I couldn't tell you. But I will say there seems to be a lot of animal involvement in a lot of the Greek mythology. But whatever, their child turned out to be a magnificent white winged horse that was incredibly intelligent. In fact, he was considered to be as intelligent as a human and was actually considered to be the god of horses. Pegasus can be found in quite a few different stories in Greek mythology, and for the most part, he's really just the role of a mount that helps one hero or another travel throughout the world to accomplish their heroic goals. Possibly his most important role was involved in the rise and fall of a hero named Bellerophon. Now, while Bellerophon's story is pretty unique, Pegasus didn't play much of a role in it besides just being a basic mount. He carried Bellerophon from one point to another. Another important role that Pegasus played was becoming the assistant to Zeus. Now, for the most part, he just performed small deeds for Zeus. These involved carrying his thunderbolts, passing on messages, helping other gods of Olympus get transported throughout the world, and little events like that. Eventually, though, Zeus did make Pegasus into a constellation. Now, I found 2 main differences between the mythology of Pegasus and the D&D lore. The first one is the name. It's very similar to the issue we had with Minotaur. In Greek mythology, Pegasus was the name of the one horse that had wings. In the D&D lore, on the other hand, the Pegasus was more or less known for being the whole species, a large group of winged horses. The other big difference is the origin story in D&D. In this particular case, it says that the elven gods created the Pegasi to be their mounts. I do want to point out though that in neither the D&D lore for the Medusa or the Pegasus do either one have any reference to the other. Now, I will say there are a few similarities. Most notably is going to be the fact that in both lores, the Pegasus is considered a good creature and is only willing to help those that are good. In fact, in almost all of the Greek mythology, the main reference to Pegasus is when it's involved in helping a hero. That being said though, it's another case where I just don't personally feel that the Pegasus of Greek mythology and the Pegasus of the D&D lore match up very well, and I just can't say that they're very similar. So unfortunately, it looks like I picked 2 creatures where the D&D lore and the Greek mythology lore just don't match up. That being said, it doesn't necessarily have to. Greek mythology was written to explain the world around you. D&D is written to help create a unique and fun experience story. Just because they don't match doesn't necessarily mean that one or the other is bad, and just because they don't match doesn't mean that you can't incorporate the mythology of one side or the other into your story. I am a little bit disappointed though. I was really looking forward to doing this Medusa Pegasus video, and I was really hoping that they would turn out to be much more similar than they were, but they're not. But either way, that sums up these two creatures, and I guess this is the end of this video. Follow me on Twitter at TheNewbDM. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Let me know down in the comments what you think, and as always, have fun.